Good morning, everyone. This is our final installment of The Age of Innocence. We did it. We got through it. It's not that the book was difficult, it was the technology. So, based on that, I will begin with an article having to do with the technology in the book. We're going to see quite a bit of this as we make our way through these last couple of chapters. The essay is called The Age of Innocence and the Electronic Revolution. It so fits. It's written by John W. Crowley, and I don't know, it seems as if he has published this himself. He's got the copyright, so I'm not sure where it came from. Well, I got it out of the library, but anyway. So this is about the electronics that we begin to see in these last couple of chapters. It's very interesting. So Crowley begins by saying, I recently wrecked the IBM XT I had used to write everything since 1987. The XT required simple software like WordPerfect 2.0 with none of the superfluous and confounding options, an infinity of useless choices that were to come with Windows, and it met every reasonable need. So some of you, I am sure, have seen the infinity of useless choices that you can use on Microsoft Word. I'm pretty good at Microsoft Word, and half the stuff I don't even know how to use. But anyway, he tells his story. He said, and then he continues, at the turbulent turn of the 20th century, innovative technology also wrought convulsive changes, though less extreme than ours, perhaps. Our forebears' bewilderment still resonates in their work. Edith Wharton's The Age of Innocence, for example, provides salutary consolation as well as survival tactics for the culturally beleaguered both then and now. And what we're going to see is that the end chapters contrast overtly the new versus the old. Seared by the Great War, which Wharton reported on from the front, gaining more experience of combat than all the lost generation, she dreaded the annihilation of civilization as she knew it, and threw herself into the battle of its defense. That's what the novel is. In The Age of Innocence, Edith Wharton jumped the abyss between expiring Victorianism and incipient modernism. The language of The Age of Innocence both reflects the veneer of old New York and tracks the interiority of the protagonist's consciousness. You'll notice as we progress that Archer's son, Newland, talks in a much slangier way. By 1920, Wharton had gained the perspective implicit in her title, The Age of Innocence. Steeped in the nascent discipline of anthropology, she had accepted that, however oppressive old New York had been, its extinction was nevertheless unfortunate. The end of the Innocence, therefore, occasioned a complex amalgam of emotions for Wharton: satisfaction, regret, and, because old New York was spared from knowing what would follow it, an odd measure of envy. And we see this in the tone of the last chapter especially. The relevance of The Age of Innocence for our time comes into focus at the end. Suppose Wharton had closed the novel with its penultimate chapter, in which Archer is stunned by the inevitability of losing Ellen. And just what's interesting is that I see in the criticism quite a bit people saying, what if Wharton had ended the novel one chapter short? But she didn't. She added in the last chapter, 34, as though to give us perspective. As the tribe, quote unquote, closes ranks against his adulterous deviance, Newland silently rails against the old New York way of taking life without effusion of blood. the way of people who dreaded scandal more than disease, who placed decency above courage, and who considered that nothing was more ill-bred than scenes, except the behavior of those who give rise to them. Um, okay. In the interval between the novel's last two chapters, Archer has lived his entire family life off stage. I'm sure you noticed that. Left alone with Archer on a bench. This is outside of Ellen Olenska's apartment in Paris. And remember, when Ellen left, Archer said, "I'll see you in Paris." So here he is outside of her apartment, gazing up at the window. Of course, windows we know those are potentially fraught with symbolism. Left alone with Archer on a bench, the reader does share the poignancy when a manservant appears at Madame Olenska's balcony and draws up the awnings and closes the shutters upon the forsaken love of Archer's life, as if to close that window. The point of Wharton's final chapter, then, is to enforce an invidious distinction between Archer's sensibility and that of his son, for whom the hum and buzz of implication, in Lionel Trilling's lingering phrase, remains inaudible, a son whose shallow, materialistic, and modern values match a dissonantly superficial mindset. That's what Wharton was afraid, or not afraid of, but what was she was observing was this now apparently shallow mindset. Of course, she knew from her perspective of writing the novel in 1920 that pretty soon World War I was on the horizon. The relevance of this novel may be, after all, in how Wharton poses the greatest challenge of radical change: to fight off hardening of the categories and to submit as gracefully as Newland does, to the transvaluation, generation by generation, of seemingly eternal verities, while also accepting change in a spirit of respect, both for what is passing away and for what is absorbing. That's a warning. So that's a really interesting point, because many people in the criticism regret Archer's response, that he doesn't go upstairs, that he stays there, and when the windows are closed, the window is closed on his view of this as well. So this is an important point, I think, to fight off hardening of the categories and to submit as gracefully as Newland does to the transvaluation, generation by generation, while accepting change in a spirit of respect both for what is passing away and for what is absorbing. Crowley concludes, if nothing else, Archer has entrusted his son and his son's future to the finest person he has ever known in a world they have shared intimately and yet innocently. For all we know, he might just be smiling contentedly. So we will see when we get to this last chapter that Newland walks away. We don't see his face. I thought that was really an interesting observation. We don't see his face. So this author says perhaps he is smiling as he is walking away, because his son has now gone up in his place to talk to this really fine human being. So I have just quantities of information, but some of it I want to leave until we get into the novel. So let's go right away to the novel. It's very exciting. It's very exciting. I'm sure you admired the way in which Wharton tied up the details. It wasn't it wasn't awkward. It was well crafted. If we look on page 253, which is the start of chapter 31, we find here that Archer is stunned by old Catherine's information, that what was it was only natural that Madame Olenska should have hastened from Washington in response to her grandmother's summons, but that she should be decided to remain under her roof, especially now that Mrs. Mingot had also regained her health, was less easy to explain. Oh golly, I hope I don't have Amazon. Dang it! And I never know how to make this pause. Just let me get Daphne. Come here. If I pause it, then I stop it, and then I have to upload several, and I think that's awkward. So anyway, so Ellen has decided to stay with her grandmother, and Archer can't quite explain it. Next paragraph at the end. Yet Archer was convinced that Madame Olenska had not accepted her grandmother's offer from interested motives. And then at the bottom of this page, 252. Therefore, if she had changed her course, it must be for a different reason. And we'll find out what that is. But remember, what we saw last week was that um, Ellen is, in many ways, the voice of reality, and Archer just spins all kinds of things in his head about the way things are going to turn out or the reasons for things. And then we find out a much plainer version of it at the top of 253. On the way on the way from the ferry, she had told him that he and she must remain apart. It was the only way that she can they can remain connected is to stay apart. Next sentence. He knew that there was no calculated coquetry in her words. She was fighting her fate as he fought his, and clinging desperately to her resolve that they should not break faith with the people who trusted them. And so we hear that refrain from Ellen over and over. She does not want to betray May. Um, she can't betray May. That's part of the social system in place, and she's at least honoring that. Um, Next several lines are Archer's interior, but during the 10 days which had elapsed since her return to New York, she had perhaps guessed from his silence and from the fact of his making no attempt to see her that he was meditating a decisive step, a step from which there was no turning back. Of course, we speculate that perhaps he's thinking that they're just going to run off. In fact, in a few pages, he thinks that they're going to run off to Japan. Next paragraph. An hour later, when he had rung Mrs. Mingot's bell, Archer had fancied that his path was clear before him. There it is. There's the reference to Japan a few lines later. He had meant to have a word alone with Madame Olenska, and failing that, to learn from her grandmother on what day and by what train she was returning to Washington. Next line. His own fancy inclined much further as she was willing to go. Oops, I read that wrong. In his own fancy, inclined to Japan. That's what it's his fancy though, and Wharton is telling us that clearly. Next paragraph, he had fancied himself not only nerved for this plunge, but eager to take it. He's ready to go, just run off to Europe. But remember what Madame Olenska said several chapters ago. Where is this place where they can run off and be free? It doesn't exist. She told him that. Next, like 4 lines later, there was nothing unknown or unfamiliar in the path he was presumably to tread. But when he had trodden it before, it was as a free man, when he had that relationship with the married woman, who was accountable to no one for his actions. It could lend himself with an amused detachment to the game of precautions and prevarications, concealments and compliances that the part required. So it was a game then. It was before he was formally married to May. Next lines. This procedure was called protecting a woman's honor, and the best fiction, combined with the after-dinner talk of his elders, had long since initiated him into every detail of its code. And we're going to even see some elements of the code when just the narrator throws in bits about how some of his peers, the men peers, ask him, "Hey, dude, um, can you vouch for me tomorrow night? Uh, Say that I'm going to the club for dinner." Um, we've seen a couple of references to that, and we'll see another one in a few pages. At the top of page 254. He had, and this is the reference to the woman he had an affair with. He had watched Mrs. Thorley Washworth, whatever, play toward a fond and unperceiving husband, a smiling, bantering, humoring, watchful, and incessant lie. A lie by day, a lie by night, a lie in every touch and every look, a lie in every caress and every quarrel, a lie in every word and in every silence. So that is a pretty good assessment of what it is, what is an affair. It's a lie. Next paragraph. A woman's standard of truthfulness was tacitly held to be lower. I hope you noted that. She was the subject creature and versed in the arts of the enslaved. It's curious. Uh, Remember that um, Wharton's own relationship with her husband wasn't that good, and she felt enslaved by it. He wasn't a great husband. He wasn't a good match for her. He wasn't a bad guy. He was just not a good match for her. There's an interesting image in the next paragraph. Um, Last line of the next paragraph. In the rotation of crops, there was a recognized season for all wild oats, but they were not to be sown more than once. That's the code. So he has already sowed his wild oats and he can't go again. Next paragraph. At the end, Ellen Olenska was like no other woman. He was like no other man. Their situation, therefore, resembled no one else's, and they were answerable to no tribunal but that of their own judgment. Of course, you hear the irony there. They are, in fact, part of this social group. They are like other people. Yes, but in 10 minutes more, he would be mounting his own doorstep, and there were May and habit and honor and all of the old decencies that he and his people had always believed in. So the narrator is telling us that this, while the social code is declining, is giving way to a different social code. She calls it a decency, and that in fact is what is partly in play. At the top of page two, or it's about a third of the way down, 255. But he knew well enough what construction the clubs and drawing rooms would put on Ellen Olenska's visits to her cousin. So there would be, and we have seen the men do this. The men are just as gossipy as the women. Everybody knows everybody else's business. If you fly on over to page 256, um, he recognizes Lawrence Lefferts and young Chivers. In other words, they see him. Of course, and they'll take that data back and everybody discusses it. Remember, when we get to this dinner party, it's very gossipy. And everybody's talking particularly about the fall of the Beauforts. Next paragraph, the quarter of the way down, it was the kind of masculine solidarity that he himself often practiced. So the men are going to cover for him. Presumably, he is going to be in need of being covered for, uh, to dangle my preposition. Um, Down at the bottom of 256. This is interesting. As it drove off, she leaned forward, and he thought he's put Ellen into the carriage. He wait, and he thought she waved her hand in the obscurity. He stared after her in a turmoil of contradictory feelings. It seemed to him that he had been speaking not to the woman he loved, but to another, a woman he was indebted to for pleasures already wearied of. It was hateful to find himself the prisoner of this hackneyed vocabulary. So we just learned that he can't dally more than once, that the code of solidarity of the men are going to cover for him. He puts Ellen into the carriage, and then he says to himself, "She'll come," he said to himself, almost contemptuously, as if she is now going to behave in the way that he wants. I thought this was an immensely interesting observation by the narrator, because it says that she's not free. Remember, early on in the novel, he said women should be free. But if she's so imprisoned, so to speak, by their relationship, she'll come. At the top of 257, we start a different category, and let's see. See notes. I said. Did I forget to print my notes? I think I did. I have to pause. I'm sorry. I think I did it. Yeah, I did it. I did it. You're back. So at the top of page 257, there's a reference to the popular Wolf collection. So that is really a collection. And I found it. It says I found that Catherine Lawyard Wolf, 1828 to 1887, was a prominent New York philanthropist and art collector, and the only woman among 106 founders of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In addition to bequeathing her painting collection to the museum, Ms. Wolfe left an endowment to Grace Church in Manhattan to promote women's work. At the urging, note on Grace Church. That's really a church in New York. It's a very famous church. It's Episcopalian, and you'll remember at the end of the novel, Archer's daughter marries in Grace Church at a Grace Church wedding. So anyway, at the urging of Rector Dr. William Reed Huntington and several parishioners, the Catherine Lawyard Wolf Art Club was established in 1896. The purpose at the time was to provide aid, counsel, and exhibition opportunities to young women artists in New York City. So just an aside, it's kind of interesting. And so he avoids this and goes to the Cesnola Antiquities. Now, what's that? I know. The Cesnola collection of antiquities from Cyprus was one of the earliest acquisitions by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In 1872, 2 years after its founding, 275 crates of objects were purchased and brought to the museum by Luigi Palma de Cesnola, who soon became its first director. This collection, with over 6,000 works, documents the art of Cyprus from approximately 3000 BC through AD 300. So these are antiquities. In all major media, terracottas, bronzes, gems, glass, silver, gold plate, and jewelry. The distinction of the collection, however, lies in the stone sculptures that were unequaled in any other institution, and that are beautifully illustrated and catalogued in this unique publication. The 635 large-scale stone sarcophagi, funerary monuments, and votive sculptures, primarily of the 6th through the 4th centuries BC, testify to the wealth and power of the individuals that commissioned them. The exceptional variety of types reflects the succession of rulers that dominated the island and exploited its resources, and shows the influence of the cultural exchanges with other great early civilizations around the Mediterranean. So why is that important? It's important because these two, Ellen and Archer, have met in this area, and Ellen says, "I'm surprised I've never been in this one before." And down in about midway through down the page, presently he rose and approached the case before which she stood. Its glass shelves were crowded with small broken objects, hardly recognizable domestic utensils, ornaments, and personal trifles, made of glass, of clay, of discolored bronze, and other time-blurred substances. That is an important setting for them. Time blurred objects. In other words, this is the wreckage of past civilizations. It seems cruel, she said, that after a while, nothing matters any more than these little things that used to be necessary and important to forgotten people and now have to be guessed at under a magnifying glass and labeled use unknown. Very interesting. Wharton is speaking to us, and by now everybody has finished the novel. I think, I hope, probably, because I'm giving it all away. But like the pieces of their own civilization, some of the codes and the rules and the nuances drift away. We are going to see at the end that Dallas doesn't even really understand them. All these things have disappeared. These things that were so fundamental to Archer and Mays and Ellen's and the Mingotts and all of it. It was so important to them, and yet it is all dissipated. So that's one of those paragraphs that needs a star in the margin. I've got many stars, and I'm putting another one in there. Next paragraph at the bottom of 257. As she stood there in her long sealskin coat, her hands thrust in a small round muff, her veil drawn down like a transparent mask. She's hidden. Remember that article we read last week? She's hidden. To the tip of her nose, and the bunch of violets he had brought her, stirring with her quickly taken breath. It was, at the top of the page, in the next 258, seemed incredible that this pure harmony of line and color should ever suffer the stupid law of change. So ironic. Everything changes, says Wharton. Everything changes, and we will see this. And for Archer to say that it is a stupid law is to ignore reality. That's a fantasy. There is nothing that doesn't change. So she tells him that she is staying with her grandmother in order to protect him and her from his coming to Washington and violating his relationship with May. She brings herself close. It's ironic, but it is what she's saying. She says, mid-page, we shall hurt others less. Isn't it, after all, what you always wanted? Down at the bottom, he sprang up impatiently. Well, then, it's my turn to ask. What is it, in God's name, you think better? He thinks it's better to run off to Japan. And you can imagine that he's thinking Japan because it's far and it won't be European court. And we already know that Ellen knows European courts. And she's been hurt by it, clearly. At the top of 259. Here I should be safer, she says. Safer from loving me, he asks. A few lines later. Safer from doing irreparable harm. Don't let us be like all the others. Remember, a couple of pages ago, he said they aren't like the others. Well, they can't be like the others, she's saying. What others? I don't profess to be different from my kind. I'm consumed by the same wants and the same longings. So he's a product of his social codes. Down mid-page, go home. What do you mean by going home? And she says, home to my husband. That's what everybody wants. Her family wants her to go to her husband. And then she says, and destroy their lives when they've helped me to remake mine? Is that what you want? She's always the voice of reason again, and she has enough foresight to see that if they were to have a relationship, they would in fact harm certainly May, but also the rest of her family. Next page. At the top, let's see. What did I write this? Right in the middle of the page. She had disengaged her wrist because he had her by the wrist. Let's see. For a moment they continued to hold each other's eyes, and he saw that her face, which had grown very pale, was flooded with a deep inner radiance. His heart beat with awe. He felt that he had never before beheld love visible. So again, a reference to that line where he bemoans the fact that women aren't free, but she's not free either. Ellen isn't. She's not free. Her family's determined to send her home. And there's some subterfuge going on here that we haven't seen yet, and that is the family is plotting to make sure that she does go back because the family is trying to extricate Ellen from Archer. And but we don't know that because Archer doesn't know that he has been removed from the inner circle of the family. Notice later in these chapters, the family is capitalized. At the top of page 261. This was what had to be then. This was what had to be, he kept repeating to himself, as if he hung in the clutch of doom. What he had dreamed of had been so different that there was a mortal chill in his rapture. Again, what he had dreamed of was different. And he does this, we saw it all last week, and he's continuing. Mid-page, 261. She looked paler than usual, but sparkling with an unwanted animation. Oh, now this is May. Okay. So we have to watch May because Wharton is dropping hints. And if you're not reading it carefully, you won't see those hints. But she's paler than usual, but sparkling with an unwanted animation. She knows she's pregnant. And Wharton is dropping us hints. So she said that she had a really good talk with Ellen. Again, remember May. She's not this pale and pure thing. She is conniving and manipulative because she wants, and you can't blame her, really. She needs to extricate Archer from Ellen. She has to preserve her place in the world. So at the bottom of 261, well, perhaps I haven't judged her fairly. She's so different, at least on the surface. She takes up such odd people. I'm at the bottom of 261. I forgot if I said that. She seems to like to make herself conspicuous. I suppose it's life she's led in fast European society. No doubt we seem dreadfully dull to her, but I don't want to judge her unfairly. So pay attention to May, because in this case, May is saying something under the text. And she's here apparently forgiving Ellen for being odd or different. And Archer thinks to himself, she hates Ellen, he thought, and she's trying to overcome the feeling and to get me to help her to overcome it. Maybe. But she has the help of the family. Next paragraph. We all did what we could for her at first, but she never seemed to understand. And now this idea of going to Mrs. Beaufort, of going there in Granny's carriage, I'm afraid she quite alienated the van der Luydens. Well, and there's Ellen's violation of the rules down at the bottom. But remember, there's always a subtext with May. Down at the bottom of 262. She rose also, but lingered near the hearth. As he walked past her, she moved forward impulsively, as though to detain him. Their eyes met, and she saw that hers were of the same swimming blue as when he left her to drive to Jersey City. She flung her arms about his neck and pressed her cheek to him. You haven't kissed me today. This is really unlike May. May is quite reserved, but Wharton is dropping hints about there's a bit of a change in May. Next page, chapter, this is 263, the beginning of chapter 32. So here's Sillerton Jackson. Remember, he's the guy that's committed to form. He says at the court of the Tuileries, such things were pretty openly tolerated. To contrast America versus European, there they put up with stuff like this. Next paragraph. Mr. and Mrs. Van der Luyden had come to town for a few days from Skuytercliff, whither they had precipitously fled at the announcement of Beaufort's failure. I think that's really funny. It had been represented to them that the disarray into which society had been thrown by this deplorable affair made their presence in town more necessary than ever. So we're going to see repeated behaviors in which the family and members of this group close ranks. And while they're not coming right out and saying that Archer is potentially going to be treated the same way as Beaufort, but the contrast is always there. Or actually, it's not even the contrast. Oh, those of you who wondered where my dog was, she's there. She's just looking around. Next paragraph. It is just at such times that new people push in and get footing. That's Beaufort, and poor Regina, she's going to take it on the chin but he's already got his foot in the door. Everybody likes to go to Beaufort's house because they have that nice ballroom. But remember, we heard an article in which the critic said that this group would observe changes from the present and see the cracks in the past and not recognize the cracks until they're full-blown changes. And that's what the Beauforts represented. They were new rich, but people liked him because he did everything so well. And yet now they're really going to trash him. You and dear Henry, Louisa, must stand in the breach as you always have. It's like having your finger in the dike, right? The Van der Luydens are going to come here and close the ranks. And, oh, maybe I have the article here. No. Mm, I don't know. I think I read that part last week. Anyway, the point is that they are pretending that the cracks in the dam haven't taken hold, when in fact they have. Next page at the top. Nothing was done without ceremony under the Van der Luyden roof. So they are the ones at the top tier. Next paragraph. Now across the Skuytercliff carnations and the massive plate, she struck him as pale and languid, but her eyes shone, and she talked with exaggerated animation. That's May. Again, another little hint that something has just shifted in May. Oh, we know what it is. Next paragraph. The Beaufort's failure, or rather the Beaufort attitude since the failure, was still a fruitful theme for the drawing room moralist. The interesting thing is that Dallas, we know in 3 chapters, Dallas, the son, Archer's son, is going to marry Fanny Beaufort, who is the child of Beaufort and Fanny Ring, the girlfriend, whom he later marries. It's just so appalling. Well, because Beaufort's wife dies. Anyway, at the top of 265, again, Jackson says something about the Tuileries, which is the French court, but a couple paragraphs later, but Madame Olenska's foreign bringing up may make her less particular, as if to excuse her odd behavior. There's an interesting sentence from Mrs. Archer, who, as you know, isn't a great intellect. She says, imprudent people are often kind. I really puzzled about that. I'm just going to say, imprudent people are often kind. I think that is, it seems kind of dumb. I'm just going to say, I can't, how can you make that, that cause effect? You really can't. I think what the group is doing here is putting people in their places without coming right out and saying what they think. And remember, that's the way they operate all along. Next page. Um, let's see. Mid-page 266. It was the custom in old New York for brides to appear in this costly garment, the wedding gown, during the first year or two of marriage. His mother, he knew, kept hers in tissue paper, like my daughter's in the basement, um, in the hope that might someday wear it, though poor Janie was reaching the age when pearl gray poplin and no bridesmaids would be thought more appropriate. Oh, the poor thing. She's reaching spinsterhood. Um, Next paragraph, two paragraphs. Though May's outline was slightly heavier, as her goddess-like build had foretold, her athletic erectness of carriage and the girlish transparency of her expression remained unchanged. Remember that, because we're going to see that May stays unchanged. But for the slight languor that Archer had lately noticed in her, she would have been the exact image of the girl playing with the bouquet of lilies of the valley. May doesn't change, ever. In fact, when we see Archer in his drawing room at the end of the novel, he looks at her picture where she has remained the same. At the top of 267, I couldn't have my happiness made out of a wrong to someone else. And this is Ellen talking. Um, oh no, this is May talking. And an uncontrollable longing seized him to tell her the truth, to throw himself on her generosity and ask for the freedom he had once refused. Um, so he's thinking that he should just fess up and ask to be set free. But we know that the society in which he has been born and raised and trained isn't going to tolerate that. Newland Archer was a quiet and self-controlled young man. Conformity to the discipline of a small society had become almost his second nature. This is a star in the margin kind of paragraph. It was deeply distasteful to him to do anything melodramatic and conspicuous, anything Mr. van der Luyden would have deprecated and the club box condemned as bad form. So he can't just go over to May and throw himself at her feet and say, well, I'm in love with Ellen. He can't do it. No, next paragraph. Let's see, why did I write this in the margin? He had already broken, one of the rules of his world, which forbade the entering of a box during a solo. That's like at the PAC. You can't open that door in the back because it lets the light in. So at the bottom of this page, he feels as if he's suffocating a bit. He says, "No, it's not that. Do you mind if I open the window?" Opening the window, and he's looking out for something. At their door, she caught her skirt in the step of the carriage and fell against him. She's wearing the wedding dress, remember. At the top of 268, no, my poor dress. See how I've torn it. The wedding dress is torn. And I have an article about that. Of course I do. It says, let's see. It is at this moment in her whipped, white, goddess-like gown that it finally occurs to Newland that the sense of unreality in which he felt himself imprisoned had communicated itself to his wife. As May announces her victory over Ellen by claiming she believes Ellen understands everything, she turns to reveal her muddy, torn wedding dress to Newland, a direct metaphor for the marriage. May's dress is no longer a perfect appearance, but now has problems on its surface. While Ellen's dress disrupts the conventional rituals of old New York as a transgression against duty, May's gown denotes her position in the narrative. She's always decorous, but a conniving, quote unquote, conniving threat lurks below the surface of her decorum. So the wedding dress isn't perfect anymore. Neither is their marriage. And May knows what's going on. Perhaps May's most elaborate display of cunning trying it on can be found in her success at getting Ellen removed from New York. There were certain things that had to be done, and if done at all, done handsomely and thoroughly. And one of those in the old New York code was the tribal rally around a kinswoman about to be eliminated from the tribe. This is the dinner party. In Ellen's expulsion from the tribe, quote unquote, she is treated, perhaps more than ever before, as a foreign visitor. May has told Ellen that she is pregnant, trying it on, as she is not actually sure when she reveals it. So she put it on, the pregnancy, when it was most useful to her, when she reveals it to Ellen, because she feels as if Ellen is getting closer and closer. As a means of deception to gain what she wants, May's trying it on at pregnancy works. Ellen decides to return to Europe, presumably because of this news. May's dinner party becomes a ceremonial ridding of the threat Ellen poses by sending off a visitor who is no longer staying. While Ellen's arrival was marked by her familial ties, her family tries it on. Remember in the opera box. While Ellen's arrival was marked by familial ties, her family tries it on under the pretense of celebrating Ellen. The kinsmen rally around May and force Ellen into the role of outsider, someone with an emphasized foreignness. Seating Ellen to the right of the Wellens signifies her status as a foreigner, and Newland suddenly realizes that this is all a performance to show him what would happen if he were to choose Ellen. And notice in the conversation, it's all about Beaufort and the Beauforts, and it signifies what would happen to Archer. The Beauforts got purged. He would be ostracized from the tribe. They let Newland try on the possibility of what it would be like if he were to choose Ellen. With this, Newland experiences an uncanny awareness that the entire event is a masquerade by a group of people, including May, who believe he and Ellen are lovers. Lovers in the extreme sense peculiar to foreign vocabularies. Remember, there's a difference between American vocabulary and foreign vocabulary. Ellen can use the word mistress, and he's kind of shocked by that because May would never pronounce that word. He thus assumes that the tribe has been discussing him, plotting against him, and is now celebrating their success in separating him from Ellen permanently. In preparing for this ritual ceremony, Ellen wears several rows of amber beads around her neck, and Newland is reminded suddenly of the little Ellen Mingot he had danced with at children's parties when Medora Manson had first brought her to New York, because she wore the beads. In fact, she's got them on here. There they are, the beads, they're kind of odd. They're not emeralds and tiny pearls. The beads Ellen wore as a child were said to make her appear as a gypsy foundling, which is fitting considering her expulsion from her family is, in effect, making her an orphan with no real home or family in America or Europe. Thus, when May tells Newland that she is pregnant and that Ellen knows, she seals Ellen's fate, as well as Newland's. May, trying it on, has succeeded. I think that's immensely interesting. All right, let's go back to the text. It's getting exciting. Down towards the bottom of 268, May, he began, standing a few feet from her chair and looking over at her as if the slight distance between them were an unbridgeable abyss. It is. It's an unbridgeable abyss, at least as things stand right now. And he's trying to fess up. He thinks that if he fesses up, she'll let him go. But she's not going to let him go. At the bottom of this page, she sat silent, without a movement or a tremor of her lashes. She was still extremely pale, but her face had a curious tranquility of expression that seemed drawn from some secret inner source. Well, we know what that is. At the top of page 269, those of you who have had children, I'm sure you felt what it was like to be that pale. So here she is, but she's triumphant. Top of 269. Archer looked at her blankly. Could it be possible that the sense of unreality in which he felt himself imprisoned had communicated itself to his wife? Yeah. Next paragraph. Since Granny approves and understands and has arranged to make her independent of her husband. So that's an interesting little bomb that May lets loose too, because now Ellen was going to have to stay with it because she didn't have an allowance, and now Granny has decided to give her back her allowance. Next paragraph. I suppose he heard his wife's even voice go on, that you had been kept at the office this evening about the business arrangements. It was settled this morning, I believe. So Newland was no longer a part of these arrangements. Again, the family is closing ranks. Next page. At the top, 270. May says, I have a note from her this afternoon. Do you want to see it? Here's the note from Ellen saying that she's going to leave. Mid-page, the sound of his laugh startled him. It recalled Janie's midnight fright when she had caught him rocking with incomprehensible mirth over May's telegram, announcing that the date of their marriage had been advanced. What's really interesting about that parallel between when their marriage date was moved up, so you begin to see that, in fact, the family was closing ranks even then. There was some suspicion, perhaps, that Archer had his eye on Ellen, and though they had resisted, moving the marriage date up, all of a sudden they did. And it's Wharton has given us this parallel where he had kind of a weird response, so that we see behind the subterfuge, the family was already beginning to work on May's behalf. Bottom of this page, she paused. I knew you'd been the one friend she could always count on, and I wanted her to know that you and I were the same in all our feelings. Wow. So she conveys that to Ellen. And of course, then Ellen is given the information about the pregnancy. May tries on the pregnancy before she even knows, and May decides to go back. She understood my wishing to tell her this. I think she understands everything. So here is that subterfuge. There's no scene, everything is even keel, but May is dropping hints that the family was already beginning to close in. My head aches too. Good night, dear, she said, turning to the door, her torn and muddy wedding dress dragging after her across the room. So that wedding dress, again, it's not, the dress isn't destroyed, but it certainly has marks on its surface. Next chapter. Let's see, right in the middle of that second paragraph, but he had long given up trying to disengage her real self from the shape into which tradition and training had molded her. I thought that was almost pathetic. He doesn't even know May. He was mesmerized by her, asked her to marry him, but he finds out on their honeymoon that she doesn't even like to travel. She doesn't like museums. All the stuff that he values, she just doesn't like. She doesn't like to leave the house. Here's something interesting. Now, this is the dinner party. And this is where the family closes ranks, ceremoniously sends Ellen off back to Europe. But the details on these two wells, really, in several pages, really reveal quite a bit about New York society dinner parties, which I think is really fascinating. So, next paragraph. But a big dinner with a hired chef and 2 borrowed footmen with Roman punch. Roses from Henderson's and menus on gilt-edged cards was a different affair, not to be lightly undertaken. All right, so what is Roman punch? I looked it up. Roman punch. Here was a time when turtle soup was a luxury dish and whiskey was an acceptable morning pick-me-up. When garnishing an icy cold drink with a dollop of meringue seemed perfectly normal. And why not? The meringue floats on the surface like a regal, mysterious iceberg. That's in the Roman punch. I'll get to the recipe in a minute. As you mix it in, the sugars and whites add a touch of cream to what otherwise is a traditional sweet, boozy punch. Although this one does not, many Roman punch recipes instruct you to freeze the mixture before serving, presumably so it gets nice and slushy before receiving its meringue cap. Roman punch was served as an intermezzo at society parties and at the White House during Rutherford B. Hayes's presidency. Hayes and his wife, who was known as Lemonade Lucy, were temperance advocates, and to get their strictures, the rumor was, someone in the kitchen devised the spiked sorbet, which was served to guests. By 1922, the drink was declared passé by Emily Post. This recipe comes from the essential New York Times cookbook and appeared in the Times in 1879. So, here's the grocery list: 2 cups of lemonade, the juice of 2 oranges, 8 ounces of champagne, 8 ounces of rum. That's a lot of rum. 2 large egg whites, a few drops of lemon juice, and 3 confectioner's sugar. So, I think that's all that I printed. Oh no. So you stir together the lemonade, orange juice, and champagne and rum in a punch bowl and chill. When ready to serve, make the meringue and put a dollop on the top. Isn't that interesting? So now, as we're getting on to Thanksgiving, you can make some Roman punch and serve it to your guests and get them all lit in the morning. Anyway, so let's go back to the text. The Roman punch made all the difference, not in itself, but by its manifold implications, since it signified either canvasbacks or terrapin. All right, I didn't know what a canvasback was, and I was a little horrified. This is why I'm virtually vegetarian. A canvasback is a really beautiful duck. It's got a red head and black and white feathers. So they're going to eat this duck. And a terrapin is a turtle. It's a bite-sized turtle. But that is that's what they ate at this really, really fancy dinner at the bottom of this page. At May's request that the van der Leydens should have stayed over in order to be present at her farewell dinner for the Countess Olenska. At the top, there is just a little reference. Mrs. Archer writing out the menus on Tiffany's thickest gold-edged Bristol, which is a cardstock. At the few lines down, May told him was in. They told him was in the dining room inspecting the mound of Jacqueminot roses, which is a hybrid, plus the maidenhair, which is a fern, in the center of the long table, and the placing of the Maillard bonbons in open silverwork baskets between the candelabra. So you can imagine what this looks like. It's pretty beautiful. And I happen to have a picture of the bonbons. Wait, went to the wrong place. There we go. One thing about doing this online is that I can do show and tell. Here's a box of these bonbons. They were just a famous New York candy maker. And then, let's see, they were Gilded Age Chocolatier. So anyway, this is quite the elaborate production. It's a very, very beautiful, very New York society send-off. $2.74. at the top of the page. This retort to his last appeal might have been interpreted as a classic move in a familiar game. Note the game language. But the young man chose to give it a different meaning. She was still fighting against her fate, but she was going to Europe and she was not returning to her husband. So at least he's taking that as a positive. Nothing, therefore, was to prevent his following her. Once he had taken the irrevocable step and had proved to her that it was irrevocable, he believed she would not send him away. That's his fantasy. She's going to Europe. She's been expelled from her family. Do we think that Archer can let go of his upbringing? No, he can't. Down at the bottom of this page. For a couple of hours, Archer had examined the terms of the deed with his senior, all the while obscurely feeling that if he had been consulted, it was for some reason other than the obvious one of his cousinship, and that the close of the conference would reveal it. So they're letting him in, they let him see the documents, but this is the first time in weeks that he's been allowed interior information. At the top of page 275, Mr. Letter Blair had laid his pen handle against his big corrugated nose. I just thought that was a really fabulous detail. A corrugated nose. It's actually kind of awful, but you can see it. You can just see it. So this is a dignified solution, discreet inquiries. These are the people have been plotting and looking around in Ellen's past and trying to figure out how they can get rid of her. At the bottom of 275, Olenski's a Finnish scoundrel, but life with him must have been a good deal gayer than it is on Fifth Avenue. So you can hear the underlying information being conveyed to Archer. Page 276. She paused, embarrassed yet smiling, and Archer suddenly saw before him the embodied image of the family, capital F. Down, let's see now. Over on page 277. So let's see now. The room was nearly full, and Archer was engaged in showing to Mrs. Selfridge Mary a small, highly varnished Verbeckhoven study of sheep, which Mr. Welland had given May for Christmas, when he found Madame Olenska at his side. So here, I'll show you the picture. A study of sheep. There's the study of sheep. Why anybody would pick that, I'm just not even sure. So anyway, Verbeckhoven did draw quite a number of paintings of sheep. She was excessively pale, and her pallor made her dark hair seem denser and heavier than ever. Perhaps that, or the fact that she had wound several rows of amber beads about her neck, reminded him suddenly of little Ellen Mingot that he used to play with. There's the reference to the amber beads. She's not wearing jewelry, she's wearing the beads of herself when she was a gypsy child. And she's going back to Europe. Down at the bottom of page 277 is that reference to her as being a foreign visitor. And 278, the fact of Madame Olenska's foreignness could hardly have been more adroitly emphasized than by this farewell tribute. Bye! Don't let the door hit you in the rear. There were certain things that had to be done, and if done at all, done handsomely and thoroughly. And one of these, in the old New York code, was the tribal rally around a kinswoman about to be eliminated from the tribe. Next few lines, Archer at the head of his table sat marveling at the silent, untiring activity with which her popularity had been retrieved, grievances against her silenced, her past countenanced, and her present irradiated by the family approval. So people had been gossiping about her, but now that she is sanctioned, and leaving the way she needs to, she's taken back in more or less. down at the bottom of this page, 278. Archer, who seemed to be assisting at the scene in a state of odd imponderability, as if he floated somewhere between chandelier and ceiling, wondered at nothing so much as his own share in the proceedings. The a couple of critics noticed that this was like some of people's observations in near death situations where they are floating above and observing, and perhaps that is the connotation supplied by Wharton. I don't know if she would have known about that, but if that is there, then he is essentially outside of what is going on in this group. Um, Here's a band. Let's see. As his glance traveled from one placid, well-fed face to another, he saw all the harmless-looking people engaged upon May's canvas backs as a band of dumb conspirators. Dumb as in silent, not dumb as in stupid, and himself and the pale woman on his right as the center of their conspiracy. And then it came over him, in a vast flash, made up of many broken gleams, that to all of them he and Madame Olenska were lovers. Lovers in the extreme sense peculiar to foreign vocabularies. I read that in that article. He guessed himself to have been for months the center of countless silently observing eyes and patiently listening ears. He understood that, by means as yet unknown to him, the separation between himself and the partner of his guilt had been achieved, and that now the whole tribe had rallied around his wife on the tacit assumption that nobody knew anything or had ever imagined anything, and that the occasion of the entertainment was simply May Archer's natural desire to take an affectionate leave of her friend and cousin. The irony of this is so pervasive. This is another one of those paragraphs that needs a start, and perhaps even two. Top of 279. It was the old New York way of taking life without effusion of blood. No one's being sacrificed openly. The way of people who dreaded scandal more than disease. This is that paragraph that I read. That nothing was more ill-bred than scenes, except the behavior of those who give rise to them. But everybody knows what's going on. As these thoughts succeeded each into his own mind, Archer felt like a prisoner in the center of an armed camp. So interesting. This is why these last couple of chapters are so interesting. It's to show me, he thought, what would happen to me, because they were talking about Beaufort pretty much the entire time, and a deathly sense of the superiority of implication and analogy over direct action, of silence over rash words, closed in on him like the doors of the family vault. Wow. It was evident in the next paragraph that the host and the lady on his right could not sit through the whole meal in silence. And so Archer has an odd moment in which he says, "Hey, let's go abroad. Shall we go abroad?" And May says, "Of course I can't unless the doctors allow me to." Then Mrs. Reggie, with whom Archer's having this conversation about going abroad, says, "I can't unless I've got this Martha Washington ball." And I looked up the Martha Washington ball and I couldn't find anything like that. But let's see what I have here. I do have somewhere a picture of ball gowns. Yep, here it is. That is a picture of New York society woman wearing a contemporary ball gown. Isn't that interesting? And you can see, all the intricate furnishings behind her and the intricate dressing gown. Anyway, I thought that was really interesting. I sometimes got overwhelmed by all the detail in here. As usual, the talk veered around to the Beauforts. Um, and let's see, Lefferts is going to give us some scathing eloquence against the Beauforts, which is all meant for Archer to hear. But what's really interesting is at the top of 281, and it was clear that if others had followed his example and acted as he talked, society would never have been weak enough to receive a foreign upstart like Beaufort. No, sir, not even if he married a van der Luyden or a Lanning instead of a Dallas. What's interesting about that is the marital possibilities are even being observed from the present. And some of you may know that, and I'll show you one of them later. I have 3 decorative dogs, and they are show dogs. And when I talk to other people in the field of show dogs, they talk like that, as if this is a breeding. It was kind of weird. Um, Miss Mrs. Lemuel Struthers had managed to worm theirs in the wake. So that was an upstart. Um, she's a vulgar woman, but once it got in the way of tolerating men of obscure origin and tainted wealth, the end was total disintegration at no distant date. So that's what they're all afraid of. And that's really what Wharton is observing down at the bottom of page 281. The talk swept past Archer like some senseless river, running and running because it did not know enough to stop. Um, that is not the only time that Wharton uses that image. We'll get to that in 1 second. It's on the next page. Through it all, he was dimly aware of a general attitude of friendliness towards himself, as if the guard of the prisoner he felt himself to be were trying to soften his captivity, and the perception increased his passionate determination to be free. And so, let's see. In the drawing room, where they presently joined the ladies, he met May's triumphant eyes. So the question is, what is her triumph? We know it's because the dinner party was a big success. Perfect. May had pulled it off. She was her mother's daughter. But we also know that underlying it is May's victory over Ellen. And Mrs. Selfridge, Mary bore across the room to join them, and it became clear to Archer that here also was a conspiracy of rehabilitation and obliteration going on of Ellen. Next few lines. All these amiable and inexorable persons were resolutely engaging in pretending to each other that they had never heard of or suspected or even conceived possible the least hint to the contrary, and from this tissue of elaborate mutual dissimulation, Archer once more disengaged the fact that New York believed him to be Madame Olenska's lover. He caught the glitter of victory in his wife's eye. Wow. And for the first time understood that she shared this belief. At the end of this paragraph. And so the evening swept on, running and running like a senseless river that he did not know how to stop. At the top of 283, convinced that no power could now return him from his purpose, he had found strength to let events shape themselves as they would. Because he can't not be part of who he is and what he was trained to be. But I did underline something in the next paragraph just because you can hear Wharton's funniness. She really is occasionally funny. Is your carriage here? He asked Ellen, and at that moment Mrs. van der Luyden, who had been majestically inserted into her sables, said gently, "We're driving dear Ellen home." Majestically inserted. But of course, the van der Luydens are driving her home because they can't allow her to be alone. They have put up this guardsmanship, which is the van der Luydens in this case. And here is that reference to the good old boys protecting each other. I say, old chap, do you mind just letting it be understood that I'm dining with you at the club tomorrow night? Thanks so much, you old brick. Good night. Yeah, and I put an exclamation point in there. But there's the society. And she says after the break, it did go off beautifully, didn't May questioned from the threshold of the library. And we know that there's a double meaning there. At the top of 284, He's thinking again of confessing to her. There's something I must tell you. I tried to the other night. Next page, a few lines down halfway. He paused, conscious that he had failed in his attempt to speak with the indifference of a man who longs for a change. Um, and he's saying that he wants to go abroad. He needs a change. He needs to be set free. But he wants to go to India or Japan. But we know that she doesn't like to travel. She's not going. And then she says, well, of course, at the top of 285, oh, Mama and your mother, she paused. See, those were the two ladies in cahoots with May. And then added hurriedly, the blood flushing up to her forehead. That is, and Ellen, you know, I told you we'd had a long talk one afternoon and how dear she was to me. So she's telling him, I told her. I told her. But that was a fortnight ago, he mentions. I thought you said you weren't sure until today. Her color burned deeper, but she had his gaze. No, I wasn't sure then, but I told her I was. Here she is. She tried on being pregnant for the benefit of Ellen. And of course, Ellen behaved exactly the way May thought she would. She's out of here. And you see, I was right, she exclaimed, her blue eyes wet with victory. So what's interesting here is that May is not powerless. She is playing the game, anticipating what Archer is going to do. She anticipated what Ellen was going to do. And in fact, that's what happened. The social structures are, the social structure righted the potential for wrong, the dinner party. All was well calculated, and we can see that now. And Archer is firmly locked in his society. And it isn't just so much that he's an unwilling prisoner. It's who he is. And so I wrote in on this page, her eyes wet with victory. And I wrote on the page, for the win. She triumphed. And we get to this last chapter, which is interesting because I have seen this in a number of places. People speculated, I told you this, what if Wharton had ended the novel in chapter 33? But we needed Wharton, and Wharton knew this, we needed her to come to a conclusion from the perspective of 1920. This is 26 years later in chapter 34. He is now 57. We've heard biographers make a big deal about that. Wharton was 57 when she wrote this. So it is almost a joint look back. We have seen that that Archer's life has been living behind the scenes. He was visited by Teddy Roosevelt. Now, mind you, I'll show you my decorative dog in a little while, but one of my decorative dogs is named Isabel after Isabel Archer, and her show name is Portrait of a Lady. And my other decorative dog is Teddy, and he's named after Teddy Roosevelt. And so Teddy Roosevelt visits Archer and tells him, you need to do something. And so Archer became a really good citizen, ran for office, won, did a number of things for a couple of years, and then didn't win after that. So at the top, at the bottom of page, I don't know what page, 286, we're getting a summary of Archer's family. Here's Mary, who was so like her mother, had announced her engagement to the dullest and most reliable of Reggie Chiver's many sons. And here's the reference to a Grace wedding, a Grace Church wedding. It has to be done up properly. It remained an unchanged institution. I looked up Grace Church. I've never been in there, but it's quite beautiful. And there's a website. You can look at it. You can see the pictures. Let's see. there's a reference to Ned Winsett. Remember that was that fellow that Archer befriended. But Ned Winsett was in that group of bohemians. He says it was an echo of Ned Winsett's old appeal to roll up his sleeves and get down into the muck, which he did at the top of 288. It was little enough to look back on, but when he remembered to what the young men of his generation and his set had looked forward, the narrow groove of money-making, sport, and society to which their vision had been limited, and this is Wharton speaking to us, even his small contribution to the new state of things seemed to count, as each brick counts in a well-built wall. He was becoming a good citizen. And down at the bottom of 288, that vision, faint and tenuous as it was, had kept him from thinking of other women. Interesting point. If you starred that, it was a good observation, because he never had another affair. He was never tempted, and it was because of the vision, faint and tenuous as it was. That is an echo of what's going to happen in a few pages. This answers the question, why doesn't he go up in her room? And it's because of this vision. He kept the vision, and it helped him maintain his place in his society because he couldn't let go of it. At the top of 289, their long years together had shown him, this is about him and May, that it did not so much matter if marriage was a dull duty, as long as it kept the dignity of a duty. Lapsing from that, it became a mere battle of ugly appetites. Again, there's the answer. After all, there was good in the old ways. His eyes making the round of the room, done over by Dallas with English mezzotints. I know what a mezzotint is. It's a kind of, this is a mezzotint. It was a way of printing so that you could wipe off the edges and it allowed for better shadowing. I thought that was interesting. It was new at the time. Let's see. In the middle of this page, and as he had seen her that day, here's the picture. He's looking at her picture. She's dead by now. So she had remained, never quite at the same height, yet never far below it. Generous, faithful, unwearied, but so lacking in imagination, so incapable of growth, that the world of her youth had fallen into pieces and rebuilt itself without her ever being conscious of it. This hard, bright blindness had kept her immediate horizon apparently unaltered. Her incapacity to recognize change made her children conceal their views from her as Archer concealed his. There had been from the first a joint pretense of sameness, a kind of innocent family hypocrisy, in which father and children had unconsciously collaborated. Keep that paragraph in mind, because she is, he thinks that she has this incapacity to observe, and yet we find out that she knew all along. Down at the bottom of 289, Mrs. Archer already laid safe from the terrifying trend which her daughter-in-law had never even become aware of. Trend in this case is change. The top of page 290, at the end of that first paragraph, and the difference seemed symbolic. The mother's life had been as closely girt as her figure. Mary, who was no less conventional as her mother, and no more intelligent, yet led a larger life and held more tolerant views. There was good in the new order, too. So that's Mary. Mary is bigger, she's a little rounder in the middle, and more athletic. More opportunities were available to Mary, the daughter. Then down at the bottom of this page, I had forgotten this when I read this the first time. Of course, whatever happens, I must get back in the first, because Fanny Beaufort and I are to be married on the 5th. Fanny is the mistress, as we know, This is the child of Beaufort. But it struck me immediately because of the name, Fanny. It's unusual, at least in this context. At the top of 291. So here's Dallas. Dallas is a businessman now. He's kind of given up the prospect of the law because that was what was acceptable. But Dallas can do much more. At 291, at the end of the third paragraph, still change was change, and differences were differences. And much as he felt drawn toward his future daughter-in-law, it was tempting to seize this last chance of being alone with his boy. Um, and they had been to Europe before, but oddly they had skipped France. Of course they did, because um, Archer couldn't circle around. He couldn't do that. Um, but Archer had declined. At the top of page 292, Archer found himself held fast by habit, by memories, by a sudden startled shrinking from new things. So he's gotten a little stuck in his old age. Now, well, he's not even that old. Now, as he reviewed his past, he saw into what a deep rut he had sunk. The worst of doing one's duty was that it apparently unfitted one for doing anything else. Um, let's see. Next paragraph. If things go on at this rate, our children will be marrying Beaufort's bastards. He remembers that. And that's in fact what happens, because Fanny is the mistress. I think they married. They did. They did, and then ran off to Europe. Down at the bottom, Fanny Beaufort, who appeared in New York at 18. That's um, like a debutante. She, after the death of her parents, had won its heart, much as Madame Olenska had won it 30 years earlier. Only instead of being distrustful and afraid of her, society took her joyfully for granted. Things have changed. 293, in the middle of the page. Nothing could more clearly give the measure of the distance that the world had traveled. People nowadays were too busy with reforms and movements, with fads and fetishes and frivolities, to bother much about their neighbors. And of what account was anybody's past in the huge kaleidoscope where all the social atoms spun around at the same plane? One of the movements that was going on was suffrage for women. So now he finds himself in Paris with his son, at the top of 294. The difference is that these young people take it for granted that they're going to get whatever they want, and that we almost always took it for granted that we shouldn't. Only I wonder, the thing one's so certain of in advance, can it ever make one's heart beat as wildly? And from this conversation, Dallas lets it fly that his mother knew before she died that Archer had given up what he had loved. Let's see, down at the bottom of this page 294. Now the spectacle was before him in its glory. This is Paris. And as he looked out on it, he felt shy, old-fashioned, inadequate, a mere gray speck of a man compared with the ruthless, magnificent fellow he had dreamed of being. But, in fact, that's what his son has become. There's a reference to a Parisian theater, the Grand Guignol. I'm not sure if I've said that correctly, but it was a theater that was still intact in 1960, and it was a theater that specialized in horror shows. Yeah, it doesn't sound that good to me. Um, um, Here's the conversation between him and Dallas. His father drew back a step, releasing his arm. About Fanny, but my dear fellow, I should hope so. Only I don't see. And Dallas says, "Dash it, Dad, don't be prehistoric. Wasn't she once your Fanny?" And Dallas belonged body and soul to the new generation. He was the firstborn of Newland and May Archer, yet it had never been possible to inculcate him in even the rudiments of reserve. And I'm sure you noticed that his dialogue tends to be a little slangy. 290, 296. She here's where Dallas reveals that May said before her death of pneumonia, that you'd given up the thing you wanted most. And at length he said in a low whisper, she never asked me. And Dallas said, no, I forgot. You never did ask each other anything, did you? Wow. And you never told each other anything. You just sat and watched each other and guessed at what was going on underneath. Really good observation. Next paragraph. He had to deal all at once with the packed regrets and stifled memories of an inarticulate lifetime. Over on page 297, towards the bottom of the page. As Archer listened, his sense of inadequacy and inexpressiveness increased. The boy was not insensitive, he knew, but he had the facility and self-confidence that came of looking at fate not as a master, but as an equal. Remember, a chapter ago, Archer had said that he was giving in to his fate. Well, Dallas is like a spokesman of the new generation. Over on page 298, they walk through Paris. Remember, Wharton lived in Paris for many years. And they walk past Invalides, and if you know of what Paris looks like, Invalides is kind of in the middle, and there are spokes of streets coming out. And on one of those spokes is where Ellen lives, like as if she's right in the middle. Then towards the bottom of 298, at the end of the second complete paragraph, perhaps she too had kept her memory of him as something apart. Here again is another answer to the question, why doesn't he go upstairs? But if she had, it must have been like a relic in a small dim chapel where there was not time to pray every day. The Invalides, by the way, is the museum in Paris that houses French history, particularly French military history. Page 299. Archer says, but I should like you please to go up without me. And Dallas says, but I say, Dad, do you mean you won't come at all? And Archer says slowly, I don't know. If you won't, she won't understand. Go, my boy, perhaps I shall follow. And he says, towards the bottom of this page, say, I'm old-fashioned. That's enough. She'll know. She will know. So there's freedom for Archer in the memory. And he thinks that if he acts on it, that he will be imprisoned by something else. If you look on the next page, second last paragraph, it's more real to me here than if I went up, he suddenly heard himself say, and the fear lest that last shadow of reality should lose its edge kept him rooted to his seat as the last minutes succeeded each other. So he can still have his love for her in the way it's been for the last 27 years, as long as he walks away. And he sat for a long time. Here's where the manservant comes out and closes the windows. And as if it had been the signal he waited for, Newland Archer got up slowly and walked back alone to his hotel. We don't see his facial expression, as I said. He never really sees her in Paris. Remember, when she left, he said, I'll see you in Paris. But he doesn't. The new century, which is represented by Dallas, allows more freedom. Dallas can go upstairs. He's the Newland Archer that Ellen will remember from the past. Time passes, society changes, like the relics that they saw in the museum. So there's just a few notes that I forgot to mention early on in the class, but Wharton's subtle methods of intermingling the character, and this is over on the editor's notes page. Wharton's subtle methods of intermingling the characterizations of individuals, the delineation of each individual's position in society, and the dramatization of conflicts, such as between the tradition and experimentation. And Dallas is out there. He's a different kind of Archer. So that is the end of the book. Can you beat that? I practically cried when Archer didn't go up. I was taken aback. I wanted him to go up. I wanted to see what was going to happen. But here's one more article. This is from an introduction to one of the editions of the text. Am I over? Oh, I am. Not too bad. Okay. Archer is driven back to the old ways. His evolution from complacent acceptance of the established order through near rebellion to sullen resignation is registered through a series of brilliantly rendered social gatherings, which culminate in the terrifying dinner party of chapter 33, when members of the tribe gather in Archer's dining room to formalize the right of Ellen's expulsion from New York and the sacrificial victim before she departs for Paris. Although May has succeeded in routing her rival, Archer is aware that Ellen is by no means a passive victim. Still struggling against his fate, he wonders to her meek surrender to the inevitable until his wife reveals the truth. After dinner, when the guests have gone, May tells her husband that she is expecting their first child. Who's Dallas? That's Dallas. And that she has already hinted at as much to Ellen. Against such news from a wife, a mistress can offer no arguments, but the authority of motherhood, that most sacred of rights and of rights, rights, and rights, rights. May recovers her husband for the tribe, and the end of the chapter finds her blue eyes wet with victory. So, let's see if I have end. Chapter 34 allows Archer allows us to see Archer resigned to having missed the flower of his life. The peace he had gained in 30 years since he parted from Ellen is indicated by his changed surroundings. Save for his desk, everything in the room where most of the real things of his life happened has been replaced by the latest fashion: English mezzotints, Chippendale cabinets, and blue and white porcelain. Remember, that chapter was a catalog also of the big things that happened in that room. Even though Archer has a chance to meet Ellen once more in her quiet modern house in Paris, he declines, turning back on her doorstep. It is more real to me than if I went up. Instead, he imagines her sitting near the fire on a sofa chair with azaleas behind her on the table. He has accepted that this rich atmosphere that he already felt to be too dense and too stimulating for his lungs still binds them both to the world of the things she taught him to question. So that is the end of what I have for you. I hope you have enjoyed this. The book itself was absolutely fascinating. I remember reading this in graduate school, and I didn't do all the digging that I have done since about contemporary society, about this society, and all those details. It makes me look around at my house and my dogs and everything else to see how this represents our contemporary society. But one of those things, as I said, is my mirth at the fact that she had decorative dogs. So I'm just going to show you one of my decorative dogs. I'll be right back. I'm just going to pause. So we are now entitled to our own decorative dogs, which is, I think, Morton was so funny. And this is Isabel. As I said, her formal name is Portrait of a Lady. And so when she shows, that's what they're going to call her, even though it's really Isabel. And Teddy's not here right this second. Otherwise, I'd show you Teddy too. Teddy after Teddy Roosevelt. So with that, we will close. We are going to do another round of classes online like this next semester. So be ready when we announce it'll be mid-December. I think that's what Jane said. When we say what we're going to do and the various dates. Thank you for attending. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Um, uh, Clearly, Isabel thought it was boring. So I will see you next semester, and I hope you have a nice Thanksgiving. You probably are not having the huge crowds that we used to, but have a nice Thanksgiving and a good holiday, and I will see you then. Goodbye.